Many thanks, Pete. Yeah, the Netherlands experience gives us a lot of inspiration, and it's perhaps hard for you to know how frustrated the Dutch colleagues we have who are used to having Ideal back home, who then come outside of the Netherlands and find that they don't have an online banking solution to make their payments. But I turn to Peter Hazou. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I'll bring some perspective, I think, from a bank's point of view. I have to say, I'm very keen to be on the panel, primarily because I think this is fundamentally quite a good idea, this My Bank. It solves a lot of issues. I think it goes to also one of the themes that I would like to extract from Roberto's presentation and think about myself and our bank and the banks generally. I mean, we are here to facilitate commerce. We're here to do it in a very safe way. I think that there's a degree of trust in banks when it comes to making payments, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that this is a very good scheme on a lot of different levels, and I think it's an ideal way for banks also to help the growth of e-commerce. I mean, without defending e-commerce and the importance of its growth for reach, for business, for GDP growth, et cetera, putting that to one side, I think that facilitating that is a key role of the banks. Why I like the discussion of My Bank, I think actually it's a very elegant model. It's a four-corner model, very well known. It's not a radical new invention. It's not the latest, greatest idea. Actually, it's been very well tested in the Netherlands, and I want to draw some comparisons with some of the challenges we have going forward to adopt Ideal in a broader European context. But I do think that there is just the basic use of it as something very identifiable to many consumers who already use online banking. And to sum it up, I mean, when you use My Bank, all you're doing is when it comes time to make the payment, you're opening up the usual way you would make a credit transfer, a SEPA credit transfer, if you will, going forward. You just do it that way. It's just, this becomes an additional method of payment. And I personally think a very simple and easy one because it's not reinventing the wheel. And actually, I think one of the challenges, and Roberto would be more of an expert about this, but I think that there's a lot that has to go into this equation of the use of My Bank or any other Ideal anything. It's a matter of consumer adaptation. It becomes a change. And there are some differences here between cards, between PayPal, between Ideal, My Bank. From the consumer point of view, it looks like an icon, an app, a simple choice. The infrastructures might be different, but also the risk and liability profiles might be different. So there's an education that must happen with consumers. But I think the use of My Bank is actually very, very clear and very straightforward. Having said that, why don't we all just start now? Well, in fact, it's something quite new, this My Bank. It's well tested in the Netherlands. And we see the adaptation rates are fantastic, so that's a good news. It has actually just begun this year, and I believe, and John will talk about this, there's a discussion of a pilot by mid of next year. I'll leave that to you to discuss. So it could actually come quite quickly because it's actually very straightforward. There are some differences. It is a pay-in-advance system. So it doesn't have a lot of the usual consumer protections of credit cards, et cetera, et cetera. So that right away is part of the education that has to happen. When you make this payment, it goes, and that's it. Then you have the normal commercial recourse that you would have if you're the buyer and you're trying to, the seller is a crook or something. So that has to be well thought through. So that's one element of what needs to happen. In the Netherlands, it's my understanding, and Pete maybe could reflect as we go through more questions about this later, can reflect on that. But there is, in the Netherlands, there's a strong governance. The merchant community has really been very clear about the code of conduct to ensure that the merchants who permit Ideal payments are reputable, will follow through, will ship it. So there's something reliable in terms of the merchants. which is very important. And also the consumer groups, I think very much, it's my understanding, also very much are in favor of this. So you have a relatively medium-sized, not a huge on the European scale, market in which people have trust in the merchants that they deal with in that market. And a lot of the reason it works well is because there's this reliance and you know it's going to work. Why I say this is because as we Europeanize it, you suddenly start getting into a much broader network of merchants throughout Europe, potentially throughout the world. Then some of these issues become much more difficult to control and to be sure of. So, I mean, it becomes a consumer choice. This is a good, easy, frankly, four-corner box mechanism, but some of those other elements need to be worked through, and I think there needs to be a really good dialogue about how to do this. I personally think the EBA is a great place for exactly these kinds of discussions. It's a community of banks that work together in the collaborative space that can surface a lot of the issues about how to do this, to dialogue with the merchant community, et cetera, to really try to make this work, frankly, as one of the mechanisms that consumers can use in the marketplace. So I think that's actually quite a good approach. And then, of course, there are some further extensions which gets into the standard, I'll call it European challenge, is that as it goes more to really work in commerce in Europe, cross-border, because so much of commerce is becoming cross-border, each market currently has got different mechanisms, different ways of doing it, different mandates, et cetera, et cetera. So like anything else, as we know through the EPC, when you go to Europeanize it, you have to start to address even more how the interoperability between different markets work, because consumers have different standards. Consumers are willing to pay for some things, one market, not the other, et cetera, et cetera. There are many issues. So Europeanizing is just a challenge. But fundamentally, I think it's very clear, very simple four-box model that many consumers who are already making payments know how it works. Click, brings up my bank with pre-populated fields for my payment for this transaction, and it works. So I think that it's quite logical, and I personally really support this initiative because it actually goes very much in that direction of being quite simple and really helping the merchant community and buyers, consumers, in terms of the facilitation of e-commerce. John, I think that's my opening remarks.